Welcome to 2023 and the official launch of the Grapevine. For our regular listeners, you might be slightly confused and thinking, where has data for bluffers gone? Well, Herdify, who we work for in our day jobs, is all about behavioural science and more specifically consumer influence and how that impacts buying behaviours. So we thought the Grapevine was a better representation of that. So we're super excited to bring you that in 2023. And with that, there's going to be a slight format change in that we're going to be working with more and more guests, e-commerce business owners, e-commerce professionals, people in the industry who can share inside stories, and we can have a really good conversation about how behavioural science impacts their business and hopefully give you more to learn and more to take away. We've got some really solid guests. Starting up, we've got Thomas Robson-Kanu, who was a professional footballer. He played for Wales and West Brom, but also he's founded the Turmeric Co., which is personally I use it, a great product if you like your turmeric and the health benefits from that. We've got Arthur from Mindful Chef. We've got Chloe from E-commerce Masterplan. We've got Carolina from Levertex. We've got Catherine from Copyhouse and Michael from Marketing Memtasist. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, Michael. Apologies if not. So that gives us our first quarter of guests. We've got more and more coming, so it's going to be a super exciting time. But as always, let us know in the comments or email us, tom@herdify.com, who you want to hear, other guest ideas. We're really welcome to that, to make sure you get the best out of the podcast. But as we kick off this year, it's just going to be me and Ed. So Ed's with me as usual. Ed, say hi.
Hi, Tom. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Did you have a good one?
Yeah, I had a good rest, good break over Christmas, and ready to get going for 2023. Looking forward to the new format.
I also noticed we're both wearing our branded Herdify.
A little Christmas present from the company there.
Exactly. Yeah, we need to get our merch store up and running. As is topical with this time of year, I think we've entered the period where everyone is setting resolutions. So I have to ask, have you set any resolutions that you're willing to publicly share at least?
Setting myself up for failure is not good for my not my mental health, but for my my day-to-day life. So I haven't actually got any this year. How about yourself?
Pretty much a staple one. Be healthier, which normally lasts till about July, and then it all gets unraveled. So, good.
7 months isn't too bad.
Exactly. Got to try. Right, and I think that we've talked about it before. I think we did an episode where do your friends? I can't remember the title was. Do your friends make you fat? But really about how group behavior is instrumental in behavioral change. So very pertinent this time of year. If you're trying to change your behavior, then it's easier to change it with friends. I think it's really interesting how a lot of gyms have caught onto that with. January is the month for fitness, right? And they're all like exercise with a friend because they know that if you exercise with your buddies, you're more likely to stay. And I thought with that, New Year's resolutions, group behavior would be a good lens, which we're going to talk about today, is to kind of pick out part of the Shopify 2023 reports. I'm sure most people listen to this will be familiar, but every year Shopify release a report, and we thought let's take a group influence or behavioral lens to that and see if we can shed some light and make it better. I think is the goal. And so with that, Ed, when you've looked at the report, are there kind of some core themes that you've pulled out?
So I think so the report covers everything in e-commerce as you would expect from a brand like Shopify. It covers the retail side of things, so physical retailers that also look at e-commerce. It covers supply chain and all the issues that we've seen in the supply chain over the last couple of years, particularly with COVID. And it also covers sort of more interesting for us or more specific to us, marketing. And how Shopify anticipates marketing to change over the next year and what they think will be important. I think it's always worth bearing in mind in these situations that to a certain extent, this is Shopify's, pitch to you for the next year. So as an e-commerce marketer, it's a focus on, okay, how can they help you with what they think the problems will be and what the problems that are going to face marketers across the year. And it's unsurprising that what they really hone in on is the loss of first-party cookies. Something we've spoken about, time and time again, comes up in a lot of our discussions with our customers, that as cookies have been turned off, or opt-ins have become standard across Apple, for example, and also Mozilla, cost of customer acquisition has been driven upwards. That's a trend that looks like it's going to continue and kind of go into hyperdrive this year if I think it's now actually by next year, just about, Google finally turn off third-party cookies. And I think this has been said before, but this is the year that people really need to get their house in order. That's Shopify's point of view, and have a plan for the post-cookie world when using third-party data is going to be more difficult, and thus trying to acquire customers through the traditional methods is going to be ultimately more expensive, because you're going to be serving a lot more ads to people who aren't as targeted for your audience as they were before.
Okay. And to your point, though, they've obviously got a product play in all of this, right?
Yeah, so if you think about it, if you consider Shopify versus Google versus Facebook, Shopify don't have an advertising platform, but what they are for many people is the best store of first-party data, right? So they store the first-party data of all your purchasers, but also all the visits to your store and any other information related to that. And therefore, I think it's fair to think that Shopify is establishing itself, or wants to establish itself, as the place you go to analyze your first-party data, to look at it and to use that in your marketing and also in your sales. So a lot of when Shopify talks about marketing, it is actually, a lot of the time it's actually talking about in-store marketing. So personalization of landing pages, things like that. So doing more with your store once people have arrived at you, which helps with new customer acquisition, but only from quite near the end of the funnel.
Yeah.
And that's always something to bear in mind. And that's where I think actually a lot of marketers are really struggling, is at at the other end of the funnel, the wide end of the funnel of what you might call the sales funnel, marketing funnel, far away from the sales point. Once someone's on site, you can convert them into a new customer. But what third-party cookies were doing a lot of the time, and what a lot of people are using them for, is to find the people that you want to get to your site.
Yeah.
And to try and get people to your site efficiently.
Yeah. Okay. And did they, in the report, they sort of started talking about some of the customer acquisition costs, the numbers, really they're painting a picture that, we've still got cookies and acquisition costs are going up, so it's only going to get worse, once we lose cookies and third-party data. But what did you see in the customer acquisition numbers that was interesting, if anything?
Well, so I think what was interesting is that they included some stats from Statista, where they had how much paid search CPC was rising for different categories of product. And what they found that was beauty had the largest rise, and this is in Q3 2021. So these are actually reasonably old stats, but these are trends that are continuing. They found that they had a rise of 41%, and that compares to a rise of just 14%. So less than half of that for sports and recreation. Now, what that suggests to me, and this is purely a hypothesis, I haven't tested this, is that sports and recreation are product categories where your interest might be actually fairly well revealed, particularly on social channels, whereas beauty is a more general product category. It serves a lot larger range of people, rather than, in sports and recreation, if you're going to buy a bike, that might be something that is quite easy to tell from your activity on Facebook or on Google. So inside the advertising platforms, don't forget that's where third-party cookies are being replaced, right? It's targeting within the platforms themselves. Whereas beauty is a much broader category. A lot of the products in beauty, it's harder to pin down sort of who might be interested in those products. I think that's potentially why cost per click has gone up. Also, it's worth saying that they are products that during the pandemic had a much wider uplift in e-commerce. So during the pandemic, a lot of people switched to both ordering things online, daily staples that you used to get from the supermarket. A lot of people switched to ordering that online. And what happened post-pandemic was people switched back to buying them in stores. And because of that movement back to stores, your online advertising for those beauty products became very expensive because people weren't cutting their budgets. And they were effectively targeting people buying online, but actually that's actually a much smaller group of people, but they're spending the same amount on it, on that. Whereas products such as in the sports and recreation category are more likely to be higher value purchases, that people are less likely to be ordering, to be requiring that in-store experience.
I don't know if it's related, but also because of the rise in recreational, outside recreational activities during the pandemic, there was massive supply chain issues. I bike and windsurf, two very different sports. Both you couldn't get parts for love nor money, right? And I've heard that from people that do different sports. So I guess there was less need to acquire people because actually, there were waiting lists. Friend owns a bike shop and you could sell anything to anyone because those people just wanted to buy a bike. So I guess things like that are probably not covered. It did just make me think. I wonder if Strava, a bit off topic, but I wonder if Strava sell their data because they'd have a great feed. They can tell when you've run 1,000 miles on your trainers and you need a new pair, or you've done X miles on your bike and you need a service.
Strava's an interesting one. For people that aren't aware, Strava's an app that tracks your your activity, and it is a very interesting sales or potential advertising platform. I think it's not used for that, but it is. But equally, Strava has a history of increasing both the cost and the amount of the service that requires a subscription. Suggesting that they do struggle to monetize the product, right? There's a free version and they're constantly, I have the free version of Strava and they are constantly trying to give you reasons to join the paid for. And then maybe that is the road they'll go down. They'll start trying to sell advertising space within the app, which currently there is none. I think it's, while we're on the subject, I think it's Gap in America has launched a sort of fitness app.
What, to compete?
As part of, as part of a, I think it was Gap, as part of a kind of drive, effectively, to collect more first-party data about people using their athletics wear.
Well, they've got to be a little bit careful. I think Shopify got dinged not once but twice for exposing secret US military bases because soldiers were doing laps in the desert on a relatively small thing. And when you've got, I don't know how many people are on a base, but when you've got people doing laps all day, you actually get a heat map. So there are all these spots in the desert where I think they were supposing special forces bases where they said we're gonna turn off default data sharing, and it all happened again. But a random aside that I took us down there with that. But I guess when we go back to where that started in terms of using first-party data and the CAC numbers. So yes, yeah, they report CACs going up, and we can hypothesize why the gap's there. But I think they're seeing it, smaller scale. But we see that from pretty much every one of our customer conversations. And first-party data is certainly seen as the savior or the light at the end of the tunnel. But they made some interesting comments around how they thought first-party data would be used, which I think would be interesting to discuss. So, like, firstly, what are they supposing people are going to do with their first-party data?
Well, I think firstly, there's a big assumption that you can get very detailed first-party data.
Yeah.
Right. This is something that people talk about first-party data as a savior. What can you learn about your customers by talking to them?
Mm-hmm.
This is what I mean. And we've discussed this on the podcast before. Some people in the US like to call zero-party data. So
I think that heavily got rubbish, didn't it?
It did. But asking your customers questions, asking questions of your customers, which are them not giving up the data that is necessary for them to buy your stuff, right? But having that, what people like to call a relationship with your customers. And I think that's, there's a lot of presumptions in the kind of ease at which people think that they can get people to give up their data. Google give away a lot for free.
Yeah.
And yet struggle to get people, as we found with what's happened on Apple and iOS devices, struggle to get people to agree to give up any real data they don't even have to answer questions for. So there's a massive assumption that people are going to be willing to tell you things just because they're a brand you like to wear. In particular, I think this is a problem for bigger brands. A smaller brand might be able to convince people to give them data to help them out. I think a bigger brand's going to find that harder. And secondly, the big kind of proposal, I would say, in the Shopify report for how to deal with this, or what to do with the first-party data, and how to use it to find new customers explicitly, is for brands to combine their data. So for one clothing brand to go to another, and effectively what it sounds like is they call it a collaboration, but really it's a excuse to share each other's first-party data, and then use that as a way of acquiring new customers. Now, it's very unclear how this would work. Is it that you collaborate with people who have different data to you to try and sell your brand's products so they become your customers and then you get data on them?
Yeah.
Or is it explicitly, and because it does mention in the report about people giving consent for this to happen, is this that if I've bought, a Herdify hoodie, and a Herdify going to email me and say, we've got this other brand of trainers you might like, are you happy for us to tell them not everything about you, but tell them your email address, and then we'll send you, emails about their trainers as well?
Yeah. Well, just as a quick aside there, if you want to buy a Herdify hoodie, let us know, because we might be selling them. So back to your serious point. I think I had a similar. Well, yeah, obviously they're not. It's not clear in there what they're proposing, but yeah, I had a similar sort of red flag, if you like. Let's take the Turmeric Co, right, who I've already mentioned as one of our guests, and I said I'm a subscriber to. This guy Thomas set it up because he had injuries from being a professional footballer, and Turmeric is well publicized to help with those sorts of things. Now, as a subscriber who also has sports injuries and thinks Turmeric might help, I'd be deeply uncomfortable with them going, well, he's obviously got a sport injury, so let's sell this data to lots of other people who have sports injury related products that might be able to help him. I can think of nothing worse of being, all these other, predatory action from other people going, oh, you've got a sports injury, let's sell you something. So yeah, I was really interested to read that and how they think that that's going to how they can square that circle with personalization, but also on the other side of the report, they already talk about how people are nervous and don't trust how much data, or sorry, how responsible brands are with data. So it's an interesting juxtaposition.
Exactly, and it's I don't know where it stands from a GDPR perspective. I think that's something to investigate, and if anyone listening knows, please send us a message and tell us. But as I understand it, like a standard data agreement would be for with a standard data agreement with a store is that you agree that they can use your data to sell you their products, not they can send you they can't sell that data to a third party to sell you the third party's products. But it's a bit of a grey area, or I'm not sure how it would be covered if they send the email effectively. If the store you deal with sends the email which advertises a third party store.
Yeah.
Now that to me feels like it's basically a third party advert that's being sold by the first party.
It's not quite, but it's almost a slight variation on retail media. Someone's already got the customer's attention, and you're using it. And the other thing to me that jumps out, and we're always biased with this approach, but it still doesn't deal with the base, I guess, psychology, if you like, or behavioural science behind how we buy. There's been a lot of, well, over the last 30 years, it's been demographic variations on demographics and interests, which there's plenty of publications out there is not how people buy. But just because someone has purchased a product in a similar or, a similar or an overlapping area, or complementary is the word I'm scrabbling to find, doesn't mean that they're going to trust you to make that recommendation. People learn from people they know or trust, and just because they buy from a brand, that doesn't mean they trust from a brand. And I think it's a really subtle step, but I think I'd be interested to see how it plays out, but they might be overstating that just because you buy from a brand it doesn't mean you trust them to make further recommendations from you. It just means you buy their product.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and as we mentioned earlier, like for smaller brands, they might have, almost cultish following, and that might work.
Yeah.
But for larger brands, I think it's really difficult. And also for brands which don't establish that kind of sense of trust with their purchasers. Now, I would guess that, I don't know, I'm always of the opinion that brands think that people care about them more than they actually do.
Yeah.
And that's because a lot of surveys offer very I would say unclear narratives of whether people are loyal to brands. Most surveys you see suggest that. I think the most recent numbers I saw from last year, I think this was an Adobe survey, and they were sort of around 70% of people claim to be loyal to brands, and this very similar number would change for a lower price. Right? So loyalty only goes so far as you want it to. And I think, as you say, like trusting someone to make recommendations for you as a brand is not how humans traditionally or culturally have developed, right? We trust recommendations from people we trust. We've spoken about this a lot, right? We trust recommendations from people we trust, and in general, we don't trust brands.
Well, I think there was one doing I forget who the quote comes from, but a brand isn't something you tell the customer. A brand isn't something that you tell the customer what it is. A brand is what their friends tell them it is. And it comes back to if you trusted the brand message would be the one that resonates. But it's not. It's how it gets molded in the community is how it works.
And within the Shopify report, the collaborations they suggest as examples are between brands in similar industries, or even actually the same industry often. So like luxury fashion, for example, that are going after already quite a similar group of people, right? This is not a way of advertising your brand to a new sort of body of people. It's a way of effectively selling, I think, a slightly augmented version of your product, because a lot of these collaborations involve collaborative products. It's an augmented version of your product, which gives something new to existing customers a lot of the time.
Yeah, and it's a bit, I guess, it probably works, I would guess it works better when the brands are known, so the one they talk about there is Gucci and North Face, right? That's their two almost iconic brands in their own areas, and it's really interesting. And I guess I liken it to the celebrity marriage, right? Everyone knew when Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie got together, right? Because two big celebrities in their own mind, but I couldn't tell you who Brad Pitt or Angelina's next partners were, right? Because if they marry someone of a lesser stature on the fame, I'm not making comments about them on a personal level, it's less interesting. And I wonder, from a brand collab point of view, it'll be the same. The big brands, or if you know about it, they'll be really interesting. Otherwise, it might be a don't share my data play.
Yeah, I think that's a good example, because that sort of, there are people who previously are Gucci customers who might buy a North Face Gucci product, and there are people who are North Face customers who might buy a Gucci North Face product because of that collaboration. But how many people who are regular Gucci customers become regular North Face customers because of that collaboration? That's the challenge. And secondly, they're both massive brands, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not Gucci and the corner shop down the end of your road doing something that ends up with
half price.
A different, they're both big brands to begin with. They're not smaller e-commerce brands, which is the situation that most e-commerce marketers are in, right? They're working for smaller brands than Gucci and North Face.
Yeah, and that's the example they cite, which is not maybe representative. But I think what's really interesting there, I think it's a really interesting conversation. I don't think a lot of people would disagree that, cookies out, first party data in is the trend we're seeing. I think the big question, the big question for me is, and using their words, in the report, they say there's still one big question first party data can't answer alone. How do brands find and attract these new customers? Now, as we've discussed, their angle for this is collaboration. I don't think I'm necessarily convinced. We'll see how the year plays out. It's be an interesting one to see. I think for me, it still comes back to, you've got to look at the underlying behavioural psychology behind how people buy, and maybe just sharing your data with another business who's got first party data is maybe not going to be the way that yields the best results. But they're a big company. Let's see how that plays out, I guess.
Well, I think fundamentally the issue here, and this is in a lot of the attempts, I guess, to replace third-party cookies, is precisely that people are trying to do people are trying to directly replace the third-party cookie bit of the process of targeting.
Yeah.
People are trying to say, okay, how do we get the data in a different way? How can we get permission to use the data? Or in the case of Google and Facebook, how can we ring fence the data and then serve it so advertisers can use the benefits of the data without having to have the data themselves, right? And something we haven't mentioned yet is the ruling from the European. It was the Dublin court, wasn't it? I think last week.
Oh yeah,
about Facebook.
Yeah.
Basically suing Meta and telling them they're not allowed to use the data you put in because it's a social network to target you adverts, even within the Facebook platform. That has to be an explicit decision. So you on Facebook, you have to say, I want to see targeted ads. And I assume that it's going to have to be more than just a button that says, I want to see ads I'm interested in, which is one. I think you can click it on, I think Google has that option, right? They calls it I want to see relevant ads, or I want to see rubbish is effectively the other stuff. I want to see stuff I don't want to see.
Yeah, you'll still see the same number of ads. They just won't be as relevant to you.
Exactly.
I was going to say, I think that's a really good lens. And I hadn't really thought of it like that, that actually they're looking at the problem and they're not looking at the problem of how can we use data differently. They're almost just looking at it as Google's taking our toys away. How can we get the same toys back? It's not really maybe looking at it through a customer lens of, because there's two sides to the data argument, right? And probably the leading one is regulation and privacy concerns from consumers. We've talked about this many times, but consumers are much more aware. Things like films like The Social Network, that was, what was it, 2019 now, 2018, really opened people's eyes to some of the predatory nature of data sharing. Not all data sharing is predatory, but it can be certainly used that way, and that's caused a lot of this regulatory noise and pressure that's coming, which has led to things like Google originally trying to get ahead of it. Maybe by the time they actually sort a solution out, they won't be ahead of it. But just trying to replicate how you get the data doesn't really acknowledge too much about the consumer's initial fears, which I think probably adds weight. So again, be interesting to see how that plays out.
There's sort of the two sides of this, which is the regulatory side and then also the consumer behavior side, and the fact that people became wary. And you say like people became wary of I can't remember the exact words you used, but people using it using their data for slightly nefarious things. And it wasn't just I think it wasn't just that people became wary of that. It's like that became people's default understanding, was if someone wants my data, they're going to want to do something bad with it, or something that I don't necessarily want them to do with it. And the thing is, no one wants to sit and read data use agreements to flick through it and go, oh no, they only want to do the good stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that means that everyone's the trend is very much that everyone is opting out of everything because they assume it might be something they don't want, and they ain't going to sit there and read to make sure that they actually are happy with everything. So the only options left to companies are to provide real incentives for people to pay to share their data. And there are talks of companies paying people to share their data, for example, or paying people to collect their data. I believe, I can't remember the name of it. Someone was telling me that there is a web browser which effectively runs an ad blocker to replace the ads that are placed on websites.
I heard about that. Yeah.
And then you get a cut, like as a user of that blocker, you agree to share a lot of data, but you get effectively a cut of the money that comes back from that.
Yeah, well, there's also that plugin, isn't there? The chap that was on Dragon's Den a couple of years ago. I think Sam is his name. I can't remember. I don't know his full name, but that's it. I think he's effectively got a Chrome as an ad blocker on Chrome, I guess. That does exactly that. You can either block your ads or opt in to get paid into their wallet. A few pence an ad.
That must have been what someone was talking to me about over Christmas. This was, but it's things like that. Like even if it's not a solution, it is something that people are talking about, and if it's on the table, people might start to use it.
Yeah,
and anything that disaggregates the sort of the hold of Google, in particular in the browser space, is going to make marketers struggle more than they already are, unless they look to solutions which work outside of the sort of system replacement
point of view. The walled gardens. Yeah.
I think either you end up in a situation where you're trying to do a lot of things directed by different people, or you're trying to deal with a lot of organizations with different different ways of replacing third-party cookies and different levels of control within that. Or you look to try and do or implement solutions which help you find customers without having to deal explicitly in the weeds of how each of those systems is working.
Nice. It's a good place to draw a line. I think we totally agree from this conversation that 2023 is definitely going to be a heavy focus on first party data. As we say, there's two sides to that conversation. There's marketers who need to do their job, but there's also consumer preference to just not have nefarious or predatory actions take place on their data. So how that plays out this year will be really interesting. Probably just have to call there might be people shouting into their AirPods saying, yeah, but you guys are biased. And I think everyone in any conversation should acknowledge any biases they have. And, we absolutely play with first party data to help people. Although I'd also say whether people do collaboration with their first party data doesn't impact us. We're not competitive in that way. I think this is just a genuine conversation around data. But I think I always wish more people would call out their bias when they're having a conversation and, say when they have that. So, I think just to be clear that we do operate in that space, but it's not in a competitive way. So hopefully that's helped us have an unbiased conversation, because really, I think for us, we have a vested interest in e-commerce businesses being successful with first party data. So anybody that is part of that mix, we want to be involved and welcome. So if there's other platforms, as I said at the beginning, we've got loads of great guests coming on, but actually if there's other platforms you want us to look at and apply a behavioural science lens to it, in terms of the consumer psychology, again, drop us a note. More than happy to kind of entertain and get involved with those sorts of conversations. But other than that, I think it's probably time for us to say goodbye, Ed. I'll let you say goodbye for another week.
Goodbye, Tom.
And yes, catch you in the next one. Thank you for listening. As usual, like, subscribe, and as you know, we're a big fan of word of mouth, and you can actually now officially say to people that you heard it on the grapevine. So share that far and wide. Until next time, see you again.